Welcome to the Sober Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Brickhouse, and we'd like to take a minute to get the word out about one of our sister companies, Soberverse, the place for all things sober. We are expanding our reach and are in the midst of creating a virtual store specifically for those in sobriety and those looking for help with addiction. Visit soberverse.com today and see what's changed. And I am thrilled to welcome our sober celebrity guest, John Schrey. He is joining us from beautiful Albany. I was going to say South Florida, but which is where he's originally from. And he has 4 years of continuous sobriety and spent 8 years in the Marine Corps, including 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan. And we're going to hear about his experience and focus today on the topic of combat PTSD. Thank you for joining us on Sober Podcast, John.
You got it. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
How old were you when you joined the Marines, and what made you want to join?
Well, I was 25 years old, so I joined late. You know, I was an old man in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Or so they made me feel. I honestly joined with a buddy of mine. We were off to the wrong start. I mean, I'd gone to college a bunch of times. You know, I kept trying to get back into school. I had good grades growing up, but I was always I chased the party more than I did school. And finally, I was kind of up against it. I got introduced to opiates as well, so that it wasn't just drinking and just the party drugs anymore.
Yeah.
And my life was quickly just going downhill. And I had been arrested in New York City a few times, where I tried to go up there and live with my brother. Long story short, nothing was going right, and the writing was kind of on the wall. And my buddy's little brother was getting out of the Marine Corps, and he's like, "Hey, why don't we join the Marine Corps?" And it literally happened like that. Within 3 months, I was in boot camp.
Oh, wow. They talk about in alcoholics and addicts pulling a geographic, where you move somewhere, you pick up roots and move somewhere else to get away from your problems and drinking and drugs. Do you think joining the Marine Corps was a version of that?
I think I thought it was. I had my other best friend actually around the same time went to Narcotics Anonymous, and I thought I was the one making the right decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I was listening to JR's podcast, a while back on your show, and it was the perfect place to hide out and just kind of let my addiction just kind of grow in other ways.
Well, as I said, we want to focus on combat PTSD. Can you share a little of what you experienced in active duty with our listeners, and if there were specific events that caused PTSD for you personally?
Yeah, I went to Afghanistan twice. I went in 2008 and again in 2010. So yeah, I mean, I was involved in a couple IED blasts, right, which is an implemented explosive device. My vehicle rolled over, the tire rolled over a pressure plate, which set off a big explosion, which caused concussions and things of that nature for me and the guys in my truck. But and that's obviously that there's some trauma behind that, of course. But for me, where I think, I'm a disabled veteran, 70% for my PTSD, and I'm 100% for other things. But I think where it really lies in is the mindset that they kind of instill in you before you go to the Marine Corps. It's a mindset of mission accomplishment, kill, kill, kill. You know what I mean? It's almost, I don't want to say it's inhumane, because it totally has a purpose, but it's not human. It's kind of they teach you to just numb or just block out all like human emotion, I feel like. And so when I went overseas my first time in 2008, I saw a lot of stuff. We were in a very, very volatile area of Afghanistan. They hadn't had any troops there since the initial invasion in, I think, 2001. So it had been like 7 years where the Taliban had just been kind of running amok. And we went in there, and it was a daily, it was daily gunfights. It was chaos from the very start. And I think you quickly, that survival, along with the training that you've had, and this kind of like the ability in boot camp of them to kind of, you know, build you the way they wanted you to be,
Right.
um, really took over. And for me, the problem was when I got home, I didn't know how to turn that switch off. You know, that lack of empathy, that lack of caring about human life. You know, one of my Marines would get, you know, it had happened where they die, we'd have to load them in the truck, and the mission continued. You know, you can't be
No,
thinking rationally or like a human being.
no
You know,
time
if
for
you want to
emotions,
survive.
no time.
No.
Yeah. It's just
And
get the
yeah,
job
so
done at any cost, it sounds like.
that's it. Mission accomplishment is number one, you know, then
Yeah.
troop welfare comes after that. And again, like that's works very well in combat. You know, that's very, very good for survival. The problem is when you get home and, you know, you're expected to just translate back into this human world, you know, and the real world.
And when you got
and
back home, were you still in, how long were you in active duty?
so when I got home in 2008, again, flipped right around, had new Marines come in. So now I was in a leadership role. And it
Mhm.
was like right back to like survival, you know, teaching these guys how to get, you know, to get through a deployment like we did. And so I went back in 2010.
And
That's when I was,
what was your addiction like then?
um, my addiction stayed the same. So I'm a big guy about purpose, right? I think I had such a sense of purpose that my addiction kind of kept at bay a little bit, but
Hmm.
also kept at bay by drinking every night till 2 in the morning. You know what I mean? And you know, getting up like I had heard on the podcast before, you get up and you run if you can run, and you make sure you do your PT. It's not a problem. It's almost like a badge of courage to be hungover and running 5 miles.
And to be able to do
Um,
your job, right? Yeah.
yeah, and when I would come home, I would do my opiates. I would do coke on the weekends. You know, whenever I could avoid the drug test, it was, you know, and all this time thinking that I'm okay because I'm performing at a high level, like most of us do when we actually, you know, put our mind to something.
Yeah. And um, I know that addiction eventually brought you to homelessness and in and out of treatment facilities and psych wards. Was that, I assume that obviously that happened after you were no longer active duty. Do you think the trauma you experienced in active duty led you on this path?
I mean, I know, yeah, it did for sure, and that's one of the things I had to get used to is being able to admit that, you know, that I was struggling when so after I went on my second deployment, I was non-deployable because of my head injuries, and that's when life started kind of going out of control.
Yeah.
Um, I was sent to another duty station. I was married. I had all the things that make you think I had this great life going on, and I was slowly just declining. The drinking picked up. They prescribed me pills, so now I can kind of get around these drug tests, and the drugs kind of started to pick up. And then when I did finally get out of the Marine Corps, it was a very quick decline within 6 months.
Wow. And so you lost the family and the home.
Yeah, I moved back to South Florida. I had like a 9-month-old daughter. Um, I had my wife that I had known for, you know, at that point over 10 years as a friend. And then, you know, I had everything I really thought I wanted and what society kind of told me.
Right.
But I'd never been, and I know this now, right? It took a lot of work, but I had so much guilt and shame because when my daughter was born, those same kind of characteristics or those same things like I was talking about with the lack of emotion and things like that.
Mhm.
When my daughter was born, everyone told me, "Man, it's going to change your life." And when that little girl was born, all I was thinking about was I was kind of getting hung over and I needed to go get loaded. And I was so uncomfortable in my own skin, I didn't know how to connect with her, and I had a lot of shame around that. And that's where it kind of started. So by the time I got out of the Marine Corps, yeah, we had a beautiful house, like a little townhouse in Florida, in
Uh-huh.
Delray Beach, and you know, I found it way more. I felt so much more comfortable living behind this building on, you know, in South Florida, and doing the things in the street to pretty much survive and to, you know, continue to use. Um, they 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 just seem much easier to me. It was like second nature to me. It was almost like, and I don't want to make it too dramatic, but it was like a mission, you know. It was like, okay, I don't have to focus on these emotions and look at this little girl that I should love, and my wife that's such a great woman to me, and stood by me through deployments. That was just tearing me up, so I decided to separate myself from them.
Yeah, great. Not great. But we're gonna take a quick commercial break. Everyone stick with us. We'll be back in a few seconds.
Hi, I'm Sonia, the founder of Everbloom. We help you change your relationship with alcohol through connection and conversation. We provide small group meetings where you can share your story and get the encouragement and support you need to achieve your goals. Whatever your goals are, we're a judgment-free space. You can find us at joineverbloom.com, BLUME, and try us out with a free meeting.
And we're back talking to John. And so, you talked about not being able to connect with your emotions at all. And then you ended up losing the family and the home and being homeless. How did you find recovery? And was there a specific event that helped you get sober and to stay sober?
So I have a brother who's got about 15 or 16 years in 12-step fellowship.
Yeah.
And so I knew about recovery, right? I've been going to meetings, in and out, when I would get DUIs and for years, and my family's been ravaged by addiction. So I knew about recovery for other people.
Right.
I also had my other older brother and I at one point lived homeless together in New York. I mean, in Miami, and he died of an overdose in 2017. So I kind of saw both sides. I saw, and I pictured myself being more like my brother who lost his life. And so I went to treatment probably 12 times altogether. The VA sent me to treatments, and they just kind of throw me in a box and throw me to a treatment center, and I'd come out and just do the same thing. But I think those seeds were always kind of being planted in me, like the recovery seeds, the 12-step fellowships, right, and things like that. And I just think I wasn't done. I didn't have, and I don't know how much into steps we get or whatever, but I didn't have that hope that it would work for me, right? That principle behind the second step. Really, I knew I was an alcoholic or an addict. I mean, that was pretty evident. I was more happy living behind a building when I can use with impunity than, in a home.
Right.
But I just didn't see it working for me. And if I'm completely honest, the catalyst was when I had this realization, and call it a spiritual awakening, call it what you want. I was sitting in a an aha moment. I was sitting in an abandoned building, and I had a bunch of drugs. I was in Texas at this point. That's a whole other story, right? But I had a whole bunch of the shit that used to make me feel good and be happy, which was a bunch of uppers and downers. And I knew when I hit that vein that this was not going to work, that there was not the jig was up. And I don't know why. I had known that for a long time. I'd just been using just to be okay for a long time.
Yeah.
But that was it, man. And luckily there were people that were in my life. I had a sponsor from, I'd spent 120 days in a program, and I had a guy who was willing to give me one more chance. And I went to a little nonprofit up in the hills of Texas, where all was 12 guys, and all they did was work recovery, and that's where it started.
I'm so glad it did.
Yeah.
What have you done to heal from the past traumas? And have you been able to fully heal, or are you still a work in progress?
I'm definitely a work in progress. Let's start there, right? For sure.
And you know what? For the record, I think we're all works in progress.
Right.
I don't think
Definitely.
we're fully evolved until the end. So, but
yeah,
anyway.
Yeah. So really the 12 steps work big for me. 12 steps are huge in my life. Again, I don't know, the platform.
Oh,
I'm not
you can.
Yeah. And we're about attraction, not promotion, but just my story is those steps and the fundamentals behind them really helped me see a lot of things. A lot of these resentments I had. I'll share a couple huge resentments I had that I didn't realize. I resented my daughter for even being born, because there was a piece of me that shame was just killing me. And without her being on earth, maybe I wouldn't feel bad. You know what I mean? Maybe I wouldn't have to get sober. I could just die in the streets, but a piece of me, that shame and guilt, really was eating at me. I resented the Marine Corps. I resented a lot of things I resented the fact that I no longer, that I had that I wasn't able to feel, that they'd actually taught me to not feel emotion. You know
Right.
what I mean? But those are, yeah, I still seek therapy, right? Part of my mental health. I go to the VA every 2 weeks and speak with my therapist.
So therapy is a part of getting over
100%.
trauma.
I fully believe that, especially for PTSD, like, there's, of course, everyone probably in the rooms has PTSD for something, but it needs to be handled outside, I believe.
That's good to know. And there are many veterans out there where you once were. What is a piece of advice you would give to initiate healing from past traumas?
To initiate healing from past traumas, understanding that it's okay, right? That I don't want to say it's normal, but it is normal to have these feelings when you come from the background that we came from. When you've experienced the things we have. I think we always think that we're different than everyone else, that we, that I know I thought I was beyond human repair, right? I thought I was like never gonna get it. That I was just too effed up, look what I did to my daughter, this beautiful, and those type of thoughts.
And speaking of, did you have you reunited with your wife or daughter?
I'm glad you asked. And I don't want to give anyone false hope. So when I got sober out in Texas, I spent 10 months, taking the bus, looking for a job, working overnights, working for moving companies, just doing whatever I had to do, whatever they told me to do, I did, and I lived in a sober home for 10 months. My ex-wife at the time, finally called me and she said, you're doing the right thing here. Like I didn't plan to raise this little girl by myself. And I didn't have a lot of money saved up. And I talked to my sponsor, my therapist, and I said, I don't have enough money to get up there, and they said, if you don't go now, you may never make it. And that's all I had to hear. I got in a little Airbnb. I started seeing my daughter. I had a protective order against me from both of them. I wasn't able to see my daughter for over a year. But I went up there. She allowed me to see her on the weekends, and I just did the things that needed to be done. I didn't try and rush it. I didn't try and get my wife back. I just tried to be a co-parent and just be whatever they needed me to be, which isn't like me. You know what I mean?
Up, right?
Yeah, just show up and actually for once do it for them, not for yourself. You know what I mean? And so slowly but surely it came to like 50-50 custody. And my wife and I, again, my ex-wife, she had divorced me in 2016. We started kind of growing together. She was in a relationship with a really cool guy. Usually I'm the guy who wants to fight that guy. You know what I mean?
Right.
My sponsor said, was he good to your daughter? He was great to my daughter. Right. So I had to put the ego aside, and I really appreciate this guy for doing that. They ended up separating. And my wife and I were spending more time together, just co-parenting. I didn't have any no ulterior motives.
Yeah.
And her and I ended up getting back together, and we're back engaged to be married for a second time. So it's
Congratulations. That's such a beautiful, I'm not going to say ending because it's continuing on, but
right.
But what an amazing part of recovery that
Definitely
gave.
I mean, it's a
Go ahead.
No, it's just a testament to what happens when you get a little bit of hope, and you find a little bit of purpose. And I'm big on hope and purpose, because without hope, I feel like, why would I ever go through these? It wasn't easy, right? This stuff isn't easy at first, especially. But we got to have that hope, and you gotta. That's it. Like I can't say it enough. Like I want people. If you have a little bit of hope, we can work with it. You know what I mean?
That's great. Well, you know what? And you may have, this may be your answer, but it doesn't have to be. But we always ask our guest this one last question: what is the best lesson you've learned in sobriety, and how did it help you?
Well, acceptance is a big one, but the best lesson I've learned in sobriety is that if I walk in faith, and that doesn't mean religion, right? Like that sounds like a religious term, and I used to take it
Right.
as that. If I walk in faith, if I have like,
I know what you
and
mean by faith, but yeah.
yeah, if I do the next right thing, I swear to God, it may not get better at the rate I want it to, and I may not know why things are going on, but man, if I just stay the course and stay patient, it has never let me down. It has never let me down if I just do the next right thing. And that's like probably after like having that hope and just grabbing onto that hope is like just do the next right thing. That's
Yeah.
it.
Well, great lesson. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And to all our listeners, thank you for your continued support. Visit us on soberpodcast.com and all places where you find major podcasts to leave us a review and sign up for the mailing list. You will also find the contact information in the show notes for our guest, John Schrey. I'm your host, Jamie Brickhouse. You can find me on TikTok, where I tell a true story in high heels every day. I am also the author of Dangerous When Wet, a memoir of booze, sex, and my mother. Signing out from the Sober Podcast. Tune in for another show next week.